forest was always a peaceful escape for me, where the world's noise seemed to vanish. But that night, something was different. The familiar rustling of leaves was absent as I stood at the forest's edge. No crickets chirped, no owls hooted, just a profound, eerie silence. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I hesitated, but the pull of the woods was undeniable. The path I had walked 100 times before now seemed unfamiliar, almost hostile. Shadows flickered around me, cast by the dim glow of my flashlight. Every step felt heavier, as if the forest was pushing back, urging me to leave. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Something, or someone, was out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting. As I ventured deeper, the silence became suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in the stillness. Then a soft rustling sound broke the quiet. I froze, scanning the trees, but there was nothing. Just as I was about to dismiss it as a trick of the mind, I saw it. A figure, barely visible, standing between the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, but the figure didn't move. It was tall, unnaturally thin, and draped in what looked like tattered cloth. My breath caught in my throat. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run. But before I could move, the figure vanished, as if it had never been there. The forest was once again silent, but now it was an oppressive, unnatural quiet. I wasn't alone in those woods. Something was watching me. As I tried to shake off the terror of what I had seen, my mind raced with possibilities. Could it have been a trick of the light? An animal, perhaps? But deep down, I knew better. The image of that figure looming in the shadows was burned into my mind. There was something malevolent about it, something unnatural. With each step forward, the tension in the air grew. Every crack of a branch underfoot, every rustle of leaves sent waves of paranoia through me. It felt as though the woods were closing in around me. The once familiar path now seemed to twist and turn, leading me deeper into the unknown. My flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows that made my skin crawl. Suddenly I heard it, a faint but unmistakable sound. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and growing closer. I stopped, holding my breath, and listened. The footsteps ceased as well, as though the pursuer knew I was aware of them. My heart raced. I whipped my flashlight around, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. Yet the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, grew stronger. I forced myself to move, walking faster, almost breaking into a run. The footsteps resumed, this time faster, more urgent. Whoever or whatever it was, they were following me. The panic rose in my chest, and I broke into a full sprint, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly in front of me. I could hear the footsteps now, pounding against the forest floor, growing louder and louder, but no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape them. The night had become a nightmare, and the phantom of the woods was closing in. I ran until my lungs burned, my legs screaming for relief, but I couldn't stop. The forest twisted and turned, the path I once knew now foreign and menacing. Every step I took seemed to lead me further into the depths of the unknown. The trees closed in, their twisted branches like skeletal hands reaching for me, trying to drag me deeper into the dark heart of the forest. The footsteps that had chased me faded, but the silence was worse. It was as though the forest itself had swallowed me whole. My flashlight flickered, and with a final sputter, it died, plunging me into absolute darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled with the flashlight, trying to bring it back to life, but it was no use. I was alone in the pitch black, surrounded by the oppressive weight of the woods. Suddenly, the air turned cold, unnaturally so. I could see my breath in front of me, misting in the eerie stillness. Then, from the darkness, came a voice. Soft, almost a whisper but unmistakable. It was calling my name. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The voice was faint, carried on the wind, but it was unmistakable. Someone, or something, knew my name. I turned, straining my ears to catch the sound again, but it was gone. Only the soft rustling of the trees remained. I felt a cold sweat beat on my forehead as I stood in the darkness, paralyzed by fear. Then it came again, clearer this time, closer. "Come closer," it whispered, drawing me toward the unknown. My heart hammered in my chest, but my feet, as if acting on their own, took a step forward. The pull of the voice was undeniable, hypnotic, like it was weaving itself into my very thoughts. I tried to resist, to pull back, but with every step I took toward the source, the world around me seemed to fade. The trees melted into shadow, the ground underfoot felt as if it were slipping away, and all that remained was the voice, soft, inviting, but filled with something dark and ancient. I didn't know what awaited me in the darkness, but I was about to find out. I don't know how long I walked. Time had lost its meaning in the black void that surrounded me. But as I ventured further, something materialized in the distance. At first it was just a shadow, a figure standing perfectly still, its form barely discernible in the gloom. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was back, the same one I had seen earlier. But now it was closer. It was taller than any person I had ever seen, its limbs unnaturally long, draped in what looked like decaying fabric that fluttered in the windless air. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and piercing. The urge to run overwhelmed me, but my feet wouldn't obey. I was frozen in place, trapped under the weight of its gaze. The figure took a step forward. Its movements were slow, deliberate, like it had all the time in the world to reach me. With each step it took, my terror deepened. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something, anything, but I couldn't. I could only stand there, helpless, as the phantom of the woods closed in on me. As the figure came closer, something strange began to happen. The air around me grew heavy like an invisible force was pressing down on me, pushing me toward the ground. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the forest floor, gasping for breath. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure loomed over me now, its shadow enveloping me in darkness. I squeezed my eyes shut, expecting the worst, but instead, I felt nothing. No hands reached out to grab me, and no voice whispered in my ear. Slowly, I opened my eyes, only to find that the figure had vanished. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, and I could finally breathe again. But the forest was still. No wind, no sound. Just the quiet, unshakable sense that I wasn't alone. That the phantom was still there, lurking just out of sight, watching, waiting for its next move. I stumbled to my feet, disoriented and weak. My legs were shaky, but I forced myself to move, desperate to escape. Every shadow seemed to mock me. Every rustle in the trees sent fresh waves of terror through me. The forest had become a living nightmare, twisting and warping in ways I couldn't comprehend. Was this real, or was the forest playing tricks on me? My mind was unraveling. Each step I took felt like I was slipping further into madness. I could no longer tell if the footsteps behind me were real or imagined, if the shadows were moving of their own accord, or if it was the phantom playing with my mind. The boundary between reality and nightmare blurred, and I could feel myself teetering on the edge of sanity. Then, in the clearing ahead, I saw it, the heart of the forest. A massive, twisted tree stood before me, its bark blackened and gnarled, its branches clawing at the sky. And there, standing beneath it, was the phantom. It hadn't vanished. It had been leading me here all along. This time there was no escape. I could feel the malevolent energy radiating from the phantom, its presence overwhelming. It raised one long skeletal hand, pointing directly at me. My vision blurred, my head pounded, and a deep, primal fear took hold of me. The moment stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The phantom stood motionless, its long, bony hand still pointing toward me. I was paralyzed, rooted to the ground, as if the forest itself was holding me in place. I knew this was it, the moment I had been dreading since I first saw the figure in the woods. I couldn't run, couldn't hide. All I could do was face whatever horror awaited me. A low, guttural sound began to rise from the phantom, a deep rumbling that seemed to vibrate through the very air around me. It wasn't a voice, it was more primal, like the groaning of the earth itself. My mind reeled, trying to understand. but the meaning was lost to me. The sound filled my head, pushing out every thought, every rational instinct, leaving only raw animal fear. The trees around us seemed to bend and twist, as if they were alive, reacting to the phantom's call. The ground beneath my feet shifted, softening like quicksand. My body began to sink, slowly being consumed by the earth. I struggled to move, to fight back, but it was no use. The forest had claimed me, and the phantom was its master. Just as I was about to give in, something unexpected happened. The low rumbling sound stopped, and the forest fell silent once more. The phantom lowered its hand and without a sound began to fade. Slowly, its form dissolved into the air, like smoke dissipating into the night. I watched in stunned silence as the figure disappeared entirely, leaving only the twisted tree behind. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, and I found that I could move again. The ground beneath me solidified, and the forest, once dark and menacing, returned to its familiar state. The silence remained, but it was no longer suffocating. It felt peaceful. I stood there for a long moment, catching my breath and trying to process what had just happened. The phantom was gone, but its presence still lingered in the air, a quiet reminder of the terror I had just endured. I didn't know why it had let me go or if it would return, but one thing was certain. I had survived the encounter with the phantom of the woods. As I made my way back to the edge of the forest, the night sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The nightmare was over, but the fear remained. The forest had shown me something I couldn't unsee, something dark and ancient that would forever haunt my dreams. I would never set foot in those woods again. But deep down, I knew the phantom was still out there, waiting, watching, and one day someone else would hear its call. Are you craving more spine-chilling tales? Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to never miss a new story. Join us for more terrifying journeys into the unknown, where suspense and horror lurk around every corner. And don't forget to share your thoughts and suggestions for our next video in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Stay tuned if you dare.